Welcome back, family and friends. Have you ever wondered about running or managing Airbnbs either remotely or in country in Ghana? Well, stick around in this video and I'll talk to you about my 5 to 6 years doing exactly that. This isn't just a business story, this is a lesson in growth, challenges, and eventual opportunities. Stick around to the end of the video and I'll tell you exactly why I'll never do this again, except for one condition. Start by giving a little bit of context around my journey with Airbnb. So I was working around 2017, 2016 time in a consulting organization, traveling a lot, and I would book pretty much last minute to go and get hotels to stay in. A lot of time would be fully booked. And then I became aware of this kind of Airbnb phenomenon. So I tried it and I would get really impressive, homely, or kind of unique apartments to stay in whilst I was working, but under the budget I had allocated to me in my professional capacity. And so as I was traveling away, I was leaving an empty apartment behind. And it got me thinking, whilst I was away, could I actually Airbnb out my own property? Now, at the time, Airbnb was super simple. It was kind of like government ID, login, load pictures, you were up and running. There's been a lot more interventions, regulations introduced that make it a lot more difficult than what it used to be. But at the time, it was really, really good. And I had some really good success with it. So I saw a lot of good stays during this time. And I had to move later on in the year to another city, Manchester, and I did the same thing as I was still traveling. So this was really good and really profitable. It was often, I was out 3 nights a week. At the time, you could make it wasn't really troublesome either, and actually got really interesting. At the time, there were a lot of even kind of short-term rental academies coming up and lots of business entering the market, and it was really like a gold rush at the time. I got to learn more about automating the process and putting things in like smart locks and those kind of things to make the overall process a lot easier. I worked with family as well to help manage the process, but by and large, once I got it down to a pattern, I could see how I could automate this. And my initial and immediate thoughts were, this would be great for Ghana. Now, when it came to Ghana, what had happened was on my sabbatical year, or it might have been the year before, I would see and overhear a lot of family members complaining about void periods in their rentals and having to pay service charges without seeing it, receiving any rent. And so I approached a couple of them to say, oh, have you thought about Airbnb? And the initial kind of reception to that idea was pretty much skepticism. That won't work here. They were used to taking upfront long-term rents, getting lump sums in the kind of golden age of real estate in Ghana, especially in the center of town. Despite that, I said, okay, do you know what? Let me just go to your apartment and take pictures. There's no one there anyway, to which a few, and actually all of them agreed to. So I did that. And within a few days, I would call one of them up with various bookings that I'd received. $800 for 4 nights, $1,000 for 10 nights, whatever the rates were. But it was good money. And for the period of time, they were covering their service charge costs and actually making a very good profit. And because I was managing the whole process, it was very attractive for them. So their skepticism turned into like a bit of shock and awe. At the time, it was a really good point for Airbnb in Ghana, because when I first started doing it, you could charge directly in dollars. So automatically, there was a system in which you could earn foreign currency through local assets, and you could manage them on behalf of someone else and not actually have to either rent them or rent to rent them. You could just manage them on a property by property basis. And I saw some really good early success. Undoubtedly, 2019 was my best year. And for most of my clients, and one particular, I made them what they would have earned or close to what they would have earned from a long-term rent throughout the year. But obviously, with a long-term rent, you can have less turnover, which means less ongoing management. So the tips and tricks that I have in regards to my time then, I would use some of the local cleaners or the cleaners at the developments themselves and give them like private jobs to clean the apartment. I charge a cleaning fee and I'd make some money off that, and plus a small percentage of what was earned. Now, typically today, if you buy an apartment in center of town, they're going to charge you 20% flat rate. I was looking to charge like 10, 15%, 12.5%, etc., depending on what I negotiated. And then I would also take the cleaning fee. So it was really good times, really interesting work. But fundamentally, there were some challenges. So here are a set of cons when it came to doing Airbnb in Ghana. Okay, con number one, and probably the most impactful con and annoying con, was fraudulent booking requests. I got so many of these, it was difficult to discern between a real and a fraudulent booking request. Here's an example of a conversation that I would have undergone. Hello, good day, apartment available, blah, blah, blah. How far is it from Ghana Airport? What time will you arrive? Can I get a discount? Price a little bit higher. Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. That can happen. That's the budget. We're actually trying to economize as we're coming for our video shoot. Red flag number one, video shoot. I mean, it's an orange amber flag, I would say. I'm waiting for the flight confirmation date, exact arrival time, and this is on the 3rd of July, and you are getting flight confirmation on the 6th. It's pretty short notice. So that's another thing to watch out for, short notice bookings. In order to combat short notice bookings, what I would do is I put a minimum time of warning. So you couldn't book within a day or 2 days. 48 hours was my time without requesting an approval. Airbnb encourage you to actually just do instant booking so you can book right away. But what I find with that is, because the fraudulent claims would kind of look to utilize the fact that you book once you arrive at the property, they would try with a fraudulent card. If it got through, and then eventually it only gets processed on booking, and then it comes up as fraudulent, it might not get paid, and they're staying in your Airbnb, which was just a nightmare. Anyway, so they're trying to request it. I've been trying here to pay. My card keeps rejecting me because I'm in Africa. Can we pay you on cash on arrival? Cash on arrival is a no-no for that exact point, right? So that's what you'd get. You'd get requests for people to pay in cash, and you get some elaborate stories. To make Airbnb work, you can do extra things like airport pickups, and if you can arrange a drive, or there are experience packages that you can put inside Airbnb, it makes it good for good extra earnings. And it's actually really good viable business if you have the time, effort, and patience to actually deliver on it. You see, for example, what is your exact location and phone number? Be careful with this request. So if you're paying outside of Airbnb, it puts you at risk of being scammed. If you're doing this, please report them. So I had to report a lot of these guys, and sometimes I think I even reported some genuine people because of the sheer volume of fraudulent cases. And the reason why you have to be very careful with fraudulent cases, if you end up receiving one of these fraudulent cases and they go through and Airbnb find out, you could lose your Airbnb account. It's happened to people I know. So it's not something you should take lightly. Let's have a look. I really did not make any bookings during COVID. Yeah, I mean, I want to rent the property for a day. Friend wants to host a pool party on his birthday. Have a lot of guests over if we can smoke and use the pool too. I mean, come on. But this is the kind of stuff that I was going through managing my Airbnb business. It was like, I could just simply decline it, but these are the kind of brave things. And undoubtedly, it's likely that request could be fraudulent because, people who pay their money actually value what you are putting in front of them more. I had one in particular that was like, I'm a prince of Mali. I'm arriving this evening on a camel. Can I book your Airbnb? Okay, here's another one. This is someone trying to book the apartment, and again, it's for the approval, and this is December period as well. So basically, she was booking on the same day, 10:14 p.m. Bad signs. And I said, okay, when will you arrive? I'm actually booking it for my boyfriend, currently at the Accra Mall. He'll be coming over right now. No. Why wouldn't? No, that's a bad look, right? Again, if they get ends and it's not processed the next day, they've stayed in your place for a day, and all of a sudden, the car doesn't go through. I'll just have to leave. They've stayed a night, and that could have been given to somebody else. I don't know if I'm going to get the Prince from Mali on here. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. And even Airbnb no longer provide access to this person. So this person was kind of like, whatever they were saying, it was just nonsense. That kind of wraps up the first con. The next con I really want to talk about is tenant expectations. I've had tenants shout at me. I've had tenants be extremely rude, have ridiculous requests for all sorts of things. And the problem with Ghana is not everything works perfectly well. And if you're entering the Airbnb market, you've got to look at it as like you're entering the hotel business. So you have to bring the same standard that hotels would bring. So I've had so many small nitty gritty complaints, major complaints on things that, effectively weren't necessary, but some understandably are. We have a top up system on electricity. You top up thinking it's all good, but then the tenant comes in, turns all the ACs on, leaves them all on all day, leaves, comes back, and then is complaining that the electricity's run out or the electricity's gone off. I've had to go through the middle of the night trying to find a place where I can top up electricity to keep guests happy. So all of those things. And they all add up to kind of a lot of headache. Sometimes you get really smooth ones. You check them in. Sometimes you don't even need to be there to check them in if you've automated the process well enough, got smart locks, done your instructions, then it runs all smoothly. They check out, put the key back in the smart lock. You never have to deal with them. That's the best way to deal with it. But even then, sometimes something happens. The internet is slow. At the time, that was just a thing in Ghana. It's not something that I could immediately change. So that was kind of one of the major cons, was the tenant expectations. The next major con was around our client expectations. Now, clients were and are used to being paid lump sums for their properties. They've often built these properties with their own cash, so they're not really willing to compromise on that aspect. But when their properties have been sat empty for so long, if they have a service charge, they were a little bit more motivated, which was the case in a lot of the clients that I had, to do another route to make sure money was coming in and covering costs. But if they didn't, sometimes I'd speak to clients and they felt like they could do it all themselves, and technically they could, but there are a lot of nuances that you need to get right with Airbnb. As I said, it's like going into the hotel industry. You need to have that level of standard. And sometimes these owners were kind of doing the Ghana good enough type cultural thing where it's like, oh, it's fine, but you have to have a really high standard to kind of stay on the platform and be promoted on the platform. So I had a couple of challenges with some landlords with unrealistic daily nights they wanted to achieve, and even if you'd advised them in order to get the increased occupancy, they were stubborn. I had other things like sometimes I'd co-manage with the owner, especially when I wasn't in the country, and when I co-managed with the owner, something would get missed, the cleaning wasn't as good, and then all the guest queries were coming directly to me, and then trying to coordinate with the owner was becoming quite painful. If I was on the ground more, then I think it'd be easier to manage. But even then, there are things that slip through the net. A cleaner doesn't do something to somebody's standards. A towel doesn't get left when it was supposed to be left. So all of those things accumulate into kind of some stresses that you can have with the business. It's not a bad business. It's a good business, but it's a business that's changing and it's not as free and open as it was before. The last con I want to talk about is the void periods. Now, what you typically have with short stays is two peak periods. December, everybody knows about it. Lots of people come in. The nightly rate can triple and quadruple at that period. Everybody leaves by the first Monday in January. Then you probably pick up again around Easter, and then you could be, and maybe a little bit around August, summertime, but you could be empty for the rest of that period. So you're kind of looking at like 30% occupancy rates. Now, the challenge that came with that is you'd have this conflicting situation between a client who is probably very happy to take the peak period and the extra money, but if they got a long-term tenant in between, they would take that tenant. So sometimes you'd book a guest in for a peak period for a certain period of time or just around that period, and then then the client would go and find their own long-term tenant whilst trying to fill the void period, and understanding, especially if they were co-managing it with me, that it was a lot more hands on deck when it came to the short stay market. So you'd have these competing objectives. So sometimes I would book someone in for a period of time and then get a call from the client saying, I've found a long-term tenant for 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. And so that meant I had to cancel on the guest that I'd booked, and that would impact me negatively on Airbnb. There were certain penalties that would come across. So juggling all of that was quite difficult. If you own all your properties, that's different. If you've got the time to manage them, that's completely different also. So that's one thing to watch out for. In terms of the results, my by far best year was 2019. That's when I focused it on the most and was in Ghana actively managing things. I was actually planning to continue my short stay rental management business as a part of transitioning to Ghana. However, C19 hit and borders closed and completely obliterated that idea anyway. And there's been a lot of change since then as well. There's been a lot more entrants, a lot more buildings going up, so there's a lot more supply. And with the supply, it's happening in the kind of prime area, which means actually it's still pushing the price further even down. You have to be more competitive. Check out my video about is prime real estate in Accra a bad investment, because that will give you an overview as well. But overall, it was a good period, especially in the period in the UK. There's been a lot of legislation come in since then. So let's talk about what's changed since then. So recently, there's some changes that's happened in the Ghanaian Airbnb market. So firstly, there has been a shift to which you now have to price your nightly rate in cities. Now, I think this is the right thing to do generally for the economy of Ghana. However, for hosts, it builds a little bit more friction into the overall process. You now have to price in city and check the exchange rate and how it fluctuates and changes in order to fluctuate and change your price if you're expecting to get a dollar return. So that adds an extra step of bureaucracy into the process, which is not advantageous if you are trying to set up a business that earns you dollars easily. But to be fair, I think this is probably the right way to go about things. Another change that's come in recently, actually only towards the end of 2024, was that the Ghana Tourism Authority requires businesses in Ghana, including accommodation facilities, to continue to register and get a license from the Ghana Tourism Authority to continue hosting. Now, this is big. This is completely different to what was there before. You had no requirement to do this. People were able to stand up Airbnb businesses like in minutes. So now this is a big change. So they tried to make it easier for short-term rental operators. So they've given provisional licenses and simplified the process. And I think that's given them understanding that the sheer volume of people that would come in. How they police this is going to be another question altogether. But either way, that's the regulations. It should be followed. Here's the registration for the new simple online form. You should start right away. You got and comply with the local rules. Complete the required steps. Now, I don't host on Airbnb anymore, but I don't know if you can't host unless you show proof of this provisional license being applied. But here is the licensing form. So give you your personal details, surname, first name, occupation is mandatory, age, sex, ID number, telephone. You can do multiple different numbers, or global numbers, email address. There is a fee per property, 323 Ghana cedis, which works around, I think that's $20. Let's just check that out. $22. So $22 per property. So, if you've got 4 or 5, you're looking to about $100 as a fee. You have to add the detail of the property, number of beds, accommodation type, amenities offered, and the listing URL. You have to do that. So government of Ghana will be able to track that. And in turn, that means they will be able to track your income, which means they will be able to tax your income. And everybody should pay their respective tax. But they didn't do that before. You need to scan some documents. If you've got 4 or more properties, you need to set up a business in Ghana. Business registration is notoriously quite painful unless you've got connects in the registrar. You also need a Ghana Revenue Certificate tax identification number, TIN number. Put your Ghana card up front and the back. So all of these things you didn't have to do before. Get your documentation in place. You need those things in order to run this kind of business now. So it's different. It's very, very different from what it used to be, which adds a little bit more friction to the business. But if you have the appetite for that and the documents, it's not a bad business. But let me tell you why I wouldn't do it and the only condition in which I would do it. Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot to record this part. So the only condition would be is if I adopted this exact strategy that worked for me before. And that is the buy low, rent mid-tier strategy. You've heard of buy low, rent high. This is a little bit different due to the characteristics of the Ghanaian real estate market. So what do I mean by that? So if we look at Greater Accra and a price overview, the vast majority of properties priced between 1,000 and 2,000 cities. Now, it might surprise you, but you got to look at the logic of things. Logic of things would dictate that, well, the average salary is so low, or median salary is about 1,500 cities. I think the minimum wage is around 20 cities a day. That's going to be where the vast majority of people are going to be able to afford, or even lower. Next price bin is 2,000 to 3,000 cities, 3,000 to 4,000 cities, which means that there's opportunity to rent or buy extremely low for the whole year and subsequently re-rent at mid-tier level. So what we did was we looked for 3 bedrooms and up, and we could look at apartments, for example. And Kuro told us that actually you would be paying between 2 and 3. That's the most available, 3 and 4, right? So we could say, okay, our maximum is 4,000 cities, or let's say 5,000 cities, okay? And we could see, okay, there's around 200 listings between 2 and 3,000, another 200 listings between 3 and 4. So then we went back over to Kuro and said, okay, where are these areas where we could get those listings, right? So we're looking at the map now and saying, okay, there's some interesting areas, and this is the central point of everything in center of Accra. It kind of directs you north, south, east, and west. And we said, okay, Achimota is an interesting one, Icheado, okay, in those areas. So we said to ourselves, okay, let's go and search for 3-bedroom apartments in those areas. And we could get them for, let's say, 4,000 cities. 4,000 cities is about $300, okay? So for 4,000 cities, we could get a 3-bedroom apartment, right? And we could get it relatively close to the center of town. Now, we use that information, which was very powerful, to then go about our search with our budget. So what did we do? We secured a 3-bedroom apartment, which had 2 entrances. At the time, it was for about 3,000 cities a month, so even lower than the $300. We put a partition wall in because it had 2 bathrooms, and we were able to rent it out as 3 individual Airbnb listings. 1 bedroom, 1 2-bedroom, and another 1 bedroom. Any one time 2 could be occupied at the same time. And each of those listings were going for only $30 a night. Now, that price point was really important because $30 a night, the occupancy rate was so much higher than if we were to go and rent out or buy a studio in the center of town. Because at $30 a night, all of a sudden you're involving locals, maybe want to stay somewhere over the weekend. You're involving people that are coming in but want to pay on the lower end. So we were seeing 80% upwards of occupancy, and we were having effectively 3 listings that we could do out of 1 apartment. So instead of 1 bedroom at $100 a night, we had a 3-bedroom, which we were charging up to $60 to $70 a night, but the occupancy was way higher. So overall, you can kind of get an idea on the take. So let's say 20 days out of the month were rented, $30 a night times $20, $600. Yeah. But in an event where we got higher nightly rates and also weekend rates, we could charge higher. So on average, we were probably charging around $45 a night, because you can change you got to be very strategic in your pricing. Weekend pricing could be higher, etc. So $45 a night times 20, that's $900. We were spending $200, $250 on the month. And also because we had it for the year, in peak periods, we could take it even higher in terms of price. So averaged out net profit, there were some expenses. We were making like $600, $700, $800 a month because the strategy was right. So that's where you got to get it right. If you own the properties, if you're buying properties, and, I've seen it with other people that have invested heavily in Ghana, where you own a small studio, but you use low nightly rates, you can make a really good return. So that's the only way I would do it. That's it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed my story around Airbnb and got some lessons learned from this. We've got other videos if you'd like to check out our real estate reviews, where we could show you how you save hundreds of thousands of dollars on potential listings that are advertised online. Please click one of these here. All right. Until next time, stay safe and stay informed.